The prince had everything: wealth, power, and a kingdom at his feet. But none of it mattered without her. She had come into his life like a whisper from the wind, mysterious and enchanting, with eyes that held the depths of the river itself. He loved her, and she loved him. Yet, something always seemed to call her away, pulling her toward the water's edge. Then, on the night of the full moon, when the river glowed silver under the stars, she stood before him with tears in her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "But the river, it won't let me go." And just like that, the waves began to rise, ready to reclaim what was never meant to stay on land. The river had always been a place of peace for Prince Idris. As a child, he would sit by its edge, watching the currents dance beneath the sunlight. The elders spoke of its power, calling it the lifeblood of the land, a force that could give and take away. But never had he imagined that the river would bring him love. It happened on an evening when the sky bled into shades of gold and crimson. Idris had ridden to the riverbank to escape the endless noise of the palace, seeking solace in the whispering waters. As he dismounted his horse, something unusual caught his eye. A woman stood knee-deep in the river, her back turned to him, her long dark hair flowing like silk over her shoulders. The water clung to her dress, making it shimmer as if woven from the river itself. She shouldn't have been there. This part of the river was untouched, hidden deep within the kingdom's borders. "Who are you?" he called out. She turned slowly, and for a moment, Idris forgot how to breathe. Her eyes were unlike any he had seen before, deep, endless, as if they held the currents of the very water surrounding her. There was something ethereal about her, something that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. Instead of answering, she simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, as if the moment had never existed, she turned back to the water and began to step deeper. "Wait," he called, stepping forward. "You shouldn't go any further. The currents are dangerous." She hesitated, her body still. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the shore, her movements graceful and deliberate. Idris watched as she stepped onto the land, her bare feet leaving no imprint on the soft earth. When she stood before him, he felt an unfamiliar pull, like the river itself had drawn them together. "You shouldn't be here alone," he said gently. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. "Neither should you, Prince." His heart jumped at the sound of his title on her tongue. "You know who I am." She nodded, tilting her head slightly. "Everyone knows the prince of this land." Her voice was soft, carrying a melody that made the air around them hum. Idris studied her, his curiosity deepening. "What's your name?" A flicker of something passed through her eyes, but she did not answer right away. Then, in a whisper, she said, "Layla." "Layla." The name felt like a secret, something precious. "You come from the village?" he asked. A shadow crossed her face. "Something like that." She turned her gaze back to the river, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. Then she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "The river is alive, you know," she murmured. "It remembers. It calls to those who listen." Idris felt a shiver trace his spine. "And what does it call you?" She smiled, but there was sadness in it. "It calls me home." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. There was mystery in her words, something unspoken lingering between them. Idris had always believed in logic, in reason. Yet standing before this woman, he felt as though he were caught in something greater than himself, something woven into the very fabric of fate. He should have left then, should have ridden back to the palace and forgotten about the woman who spoke in riddles. But he couldn't. Instead, he found himself asking, "Will I see you again?" Layla studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow, at sunset." And just like that, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees before he could say another word. Idris remained there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had stood, the sound of the river whispering in his ears. Something told him that his life had just changed forever. The next evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Prince Idris found himself back at the riverbank. He had spent the entire day distracted, his thoughts tangled in the memory of Layla, her voice, her knowing smile, the way the water seemed to cling to her as if it refused to let her go. He should not have returned. He knew nothing about her, and yet, something deep within him urged him forward, as if the river itself had tied his fate to hers. And then, she was there. Layla stepped from the shadows of the trees, her movements as fluid as the water she had emerged from the night before. Tonight, she wore a flowing blue garment, its fabric shifting like waves in the evening breeze. "You came," she said softly, as if she had expected him to change his mind. "I said I would," Idris replied, watching her carefully. Layla smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Most people do not keep promises made to the river. Idris frowned. "What does that mean?" She stepped closer, the fading sunlight casting a golden glow against her features. "People fear what they do not understand. And the river, it holds more secrets than most can bear." A chill passed through him, but he ignored it. "And you? Do you fear it?" Layla glanced at the water, her expression unreadable. "I respect it." Idris studied her, the pull toward her growing stronger with every passing second. "Where do you come from, Layla?" She hesitated. "A place where the river runs deep, where the water sings its own song." Her words were vague, yet there was truth in them. He could feel it. "Why do I feel like you're hiding something from me?" he asked. Layla exhaled softly, turning her gaze back to him. "Because I am." His heart pounded. "Then tell me." She smiled, but sadness flickered in her eyes. "Not yet." Frustration curled inside him, but he pushed it down. He had never met anyone like her, someone who spoke as if the world existed in layers he had never seen before. Instead of pressing further, he said, "Walk with me." She hesitated, then nodded. They walked along the river's edge, their footsteps slow and deliberate. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming lilies. Fireflies danced over the water, their glow reflecting against the gentle ripples. "I used to come here as a child," Idris admitted. "The river was the only place I could be free from the weight of the crown." Layla glanced at him. "And now?" He sighed. "Now, I come because it feels like home." She smiled softly. "The river has a way of making people feel that way." Idris turned to her, his curiosity burning. "And you? Do you have a home?" Layla's smile faded. She looked away, her fingers grazing the tall grass beside her. "The river is my home." Something in the way she said it made his chest tighten. He wanted to ask more, to unravel the mystery surrounding her, but before he could, she stopped walking. The wind had changed. Layla stiffened, her expression shifting from soft to tense. Her eyes darted toward the water, her breathing suddenly shallow. "Layla!" Idris stepped closer, alarmed. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow step back, as if something unseen had called her name. The river had grown unnaturally still. The air, once filled with the gentle hum of night, had fallen into silence. Then, Idris heard it. A whisper. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. It came from the water, curling around them like a forgotten song. Layla's hands trembled. "They know I am here." Idris's pulse quickened. "Who?" She turned to him, her face pale, her voice barely a whisper. "The river." A gust of wind rushed past them, sending ripples across the surface of the water. Idris took her hand, gripping it tightly. "You're safe," he said firmly. "No one is taking you." Layla looked at him then, truly looked at him, as if memorizing his face. And for the first time, he saw it, the fear, the longing, the silent war raging within her. She wanted to stay. But something was pulling her away. The river was calling her home. The wind howled through the trees, and the river's whispers grew louder. It was no longer a gentle murmur, it was calling, demanding. Layla's fingers trembled in Idris's grasp, her pulse quick against his skin. "They know where I am now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising winds. Idris tightened his grip. "Who knows?" She swallowed hard, her gaze locked onto the water. "The ones who sent me here. The ones who want me back." The air grew heavy, charged with something unseen. The fireflies that had danced so freely moments ago had vanished, and the once calm river churned with restless waves. "Layla, tell me what's happening," Idris demanded, his voice urgent. She turned to him, her dark eyes shimmering with fear. "The river is not just water, Idris. It is alive. It remembers." and it does not let go of what belongs to it. His chest tightened. You don't belong to the river. You belong here, with me. A sad smile flickered across her lips. You don't understand. I was never supposed to stay. Lightning crackled in the sky, illuminating the dark water for a brief moment. The river was rising, its waves stretching toward the shore as if reaching for her. Idris stepped in front of her instinctively, his body shielding hers. "No," he said firmly. "I won't let them take you." Layla shook her head. "It's not something you can fight, Idris." His heart pounded. "Then tell me how to stop it." She hesitated, her hands clenching the fabric of her dress. "The river only takes what it believes still belongs to it. If I sever my bond to it, I might be able to stay." Hope flared in his chest. "Then we'll break it." Layla's expression darkened. "It's not that simple." The wind lashed against them, and suddenly, from the depths of the water, figures began to emerge. They were unlike anything Idris had ever seen, tall, ethereal beings, their skin glistening like the surface of the river under moonlight. Their eyes, dark and endless, held no malice, only inevitability. They did not walk, they glided, their feet never touching the ground. One of them stepped forward, his voice a deep, resonant echo. "Layla." She inhaled sharply, gripping Idris's arm. "You cannot stay," the figure continued. "The river calls for you." "She's not going anywhere," Idris said, stepping in front of her. The being's gaze settled on him, unblinking. "You do not understand, mortal. She is not like you. She was never meant to be here." Layla's voice was barely above a whisper. "Please." The water spirits did not move closer, but the waves did. The river surged, its pull strengthening, reaching for her like invisible hands. Idris's mind raced. He would not lose her. He could not. He turned to her. "Tell me how to break the bond." Layla's lips parted, but before she could answer, the lead spirit spoke again. "The river has given you time, Layla," he said. "But now, it demands what is its own." She trembled against Idris. "No. I choose to stay." A ripple passed through the figures, as if her words had disrupted the balance of something ancient. The leader sighed. "Then you must pay the price." Layla's breath hitched. Idris's grip tightened on her hand. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together." The river spirit's eyes flickered. "A life for a life." Silence. The words sent a chill through Idris's blood. Layla's face paled. "No." The spirit continued, his tone unwavering. "To sever your bond, the river must take something in return. A soul must be given." Layla shook her head violently. "There has to be another way." The water surged, growing impatient. "There is not," the spirit replied. "The balance must be restored." Idris didn't hesitate. "Take me." Layla gasped, whirling to face him. "No." The spirits regarded him, their expressions unreadable. Idris met their gaze. "If a life must be given, take mine. Let her stay." Tears welled in Layla's eyes. "Idris, please." "You can't." He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing over her cheeks. "I can. And I will." The spirits remained silent for a moment, the water stilling as if considering. Then the leader spoke. "A willing sacrifice is a rare thing." Idris straightened. "Then take it." The spirit's gaze shifted to Layla. "You would let him do this?" Layla was trembling, her hands gripping Idris as if she could hold him to this world. "No," she whispered. "I won't let you." The water surged again, the choice pressing upon them. Then, in a voice so broken it shattered the night, Layla screamed, "I will give the river my voice." The spirits stilled. Idris turned to her, confused. "Layla." She gripped his hands, tears falling freely now. "If I give my voice, I sever my bond. The river will have no claim over me." The lead spirit studied her. "You would give up the gift of the river?" Layla nodded. "Yes." A heavy silence followed. Finally, the spirit lifted his hand. "Then so be it." The water swirled around Layla's feet, glowing faintly. A whisper passed through the air, carrying words in a language Idris did not understand. Then, all at once, Layla gasped. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. She stumbled, clutching her throat. Idris caught her, his heart pounding. "Layla!" She tried to speak, but nothing came. The spirits nodded, satisfied. "It is done." The waves retreated, the wind stilled, and the river returned to its natural rhythm. The spirits, one by one, dissolved into the water, their forms vanishing beneath the surface. Idris held Layla close, feeling her shudder against him. She had given up her voice to stay. She looked up at him, eyes filled with love, sorrow, and something unbreakable. She could not say it. But she did not need to. She had chosen him. And the river would never take her again. Layla collapsed into Idris's arms, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The silence that followed was thick, heavier than the crashing waves had ever been. The river spirits had vanished, but they had taken something irreplaceable, her voice. Idris held her, his heart pounding as he realized what she had done. She had severed her bond to the river, but at what cost? Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her dark eyes filled with emotion, grief, relief, love, but her voice, the melody that had enchanted him from the start, was gone. "Layla!" Idris cupped her face, brushing away the tears that slipped down her cheeks. "Why did you do this?" She exhaled shakily, lowering her gaze, her fingers tightening against his arm. She had no way to answer, no way to explain that this had been her only choice. The wind had stilled. The water was calm. The river had accepted her sacrifice. Idris pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. "I would have given myself for you," he whispered. "You didn't have to do this." Layla lifted her hand, placing it gently over his heart. A silent response. "I had to." Tears burned in his eyes as he pulled her into his embrace. She had given up her voice so they could have a future. She had chosen him, chosen love over the water that had once claimed her. And yet, the ache in his chest remained. She would never sing again. The kingdoms whispered questions. The journey back to the palace was quiet. Layla held his hand the entire way, her grip firm, as if afraid the river would change its mind and come for her once more. When they arrived at the gates, the guards exchanged wary glances. The prince had left alone and returned with a woman who did not speak. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Who is she? Why does she not talk? Where did she come from?" Idris silenced them with a single look. He led Layla through the corridors, past the curious eyes of nobles and servants, bringing her straight to his chambers. She belonged with him now. In the candlelight, she traced words into the palm of his hand, soft and careful. "Will they accept me?" He kissed her fingers, his heart aching. "They will because I do." But he knew the truth. The palace was not like the river. It did not forget, and it did not forgive. Layla's silence would become a mystery, a story that courtiers would whisper behind closed doors. They would question her, wonder where she had come from and what she had left behind. Some might even suspect the truth, that she was something more than human. A silent life, a love that spoke volumes. Days turned to weeks, and Layla remained by his side. She learned to navigate her new world without a voice, speaking through touches, gestures, and the softest of expressions. Idris had never imagined love could exist in silence, but with Layla, words became unnecessary. He saw her thoughts in her eyes, felt her emotions in every movement of her hands. She laughed without sound, her smile enough to light the entire room. She comforted without words, her gentle touch speaking louder than any sentence ever could. And in the evenings, when the world was quiet, she would take his hand and place it over her heart. "I am here. I chose this." But as much as he cherished their love, Idris knew the truth. Layla had not just given up her voice. She had given up a part of herself. She no longer went near the river. She never touched the water. She avoided it as if it might reclaim her at any moment. And deep in her eyes, beyond the love and warmth, there was something else, a sorrow that never faded. The river never forgets. One evening, under the silver glow of the moon, Idris found her standing at the balcony, staring out toward the river in the distance. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You still hear it, don't you?" She nodded. His throat tightened. "Does it still call for you?" Layla lifted her hand, tracing a single word against his palm. Always. A lump formed in his throat. She had won. She had broken free. But the river had never truly let her go. And perhaps it never would. Idris turned her toward him, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Then I will hold onto you tighter." She smiled, but there was sadness in it. The river would always whisper her name. But she would never answer. And so, the prince loved her, and she loved him. But between them stood the silent echo of what had been lost. And though Layla never spoke again, the river never stopped speaking for her.